The whole purpose of the channel is to help change the world one leader at a time. So, all right. So today I'm going to talk a little about history, and I'm going to talk a little about how to be successful at a and I would say relatively young age. So a couple things about some companies. I don't know if you guys have heard of these names before. But has anybody ever heard of a company named Costco? Maybe. Has anybody heard the name, I don't know, Hewlett Packard? Maybe. HP? They go by HP sometimes. What about Coors? They like to drink the little cervecitas? They like to drink the brewskis? What about Charles Schwab? That's another one. Some of you guys may have heard that name before. I got a couple more for you. Maybe Revlon. That's another one. Oh, maybe even FedEx. Have you ever get a package this week? Maybe you heard of FedEx. What about UPS? No. Maybe if you got a FedEx, you probably didn't hear about UPS. Maybe Fortune magazine. You guys hear about that one before? What about General Motors for you guys that are here in Detroit City? Procter and Gamble, another big name. Microsoft, United Airlines. I can go on and on. LinkedIn. So what tell you a little bit about those companies, those organizations. They actually share something in common. And every single one of those organizations started and were created and built. Some of their strongest years were in an economic downturn. Some of them were in like the Depression or the recessions, panics of 1907. Was General Motors. LinkedIn came about after the dot-com, bubble or burst or whatever they say happened. That was like right when I was in college. I know I was in college at 7 years old. Coors was in the Depression of 1873. So there's so many organizations that in history, some big brands that got started when things in the world didn't look so good. And it's very interesting because the business that we're building now in the last 3 years, this EDM business and the retailers, some of you guys may or may not know this, but we also started during a pretty tough time. 2020, the whole world flipped upside down. We had literally taken on a couple stores here in Michigan. And a few weeks later, the world decided to close down. They started, stopping people, and they made you wear masks. And I'll never forget the phone calls from the clients and from partners and trying to ask questions around, what are we going to do? Are we going to continue this? Are we going to continue, in the stores? And fortunately, we're seen as an essential business because we're in the wireless space and people need cell phones and cell phone support. And so we stayed in the stores. So anyways, my point is that the guys that were in the business back then and really getting the business rocking, we adopted some things. We saw challenges and we decided to look at things a certain way. So give an example. One of the big challenges we had, and imagine we're in face-to-face sales. And we were talking to people with a mask on. Kind of a challenge, bit of an obstacle. Hey, how are you? Imagine do this all day, like talking to people. Hey, how are you? We're doing promotions for customers today in the store. Like that was literally what we had to do. And it was interesting because I read some articles around, the medical field and how people in the medical field were having issues and how they felt when doctors would come into the room. And they felt a lot more nervous, a lot more anxiety. And someone in New York, in the midst of this big pandemic we had this idea to make a badge with a big smile on it and funny faces and different things or whatever. And doctors started walking into surgeries. Doctors started walking in to deal with patients with badges that were like the size of an 8x11 with a massive smile on their face. And it was goofy and silly and fun. And we actually did that. So the people that are in the field back then, we made badges that were literally like huge, that took, almost covered their whole, stomach area, which is funny with the little hook on it and everything. And people would literally stop and laugh. So we took an obstacle, we took a massive challenge and we flipped it and turned it into an advantage. And so my point of bringing this up is there is key things that these organizations did. And the most important, the most of them that if you study the companies, they all talked about how they never let the outside world affect their inside world. They were so focused on what they were doing. They're so present in the industry or in the company or getting the job done that they never let other people's opinions, they never let other people's situations, they never let it get in their way. And so I'll tell you, when you take that route, you take that mindset towards your day, you tend to be in more control. And, some things that come to my mind, and it's interesting because that could have totally been a negative. That could totally been an emotional, frustrated challenge. And, I'll tell you, when you lose your cool and you lose your, sense of indifference or your confidence about something, you tend to make bad decisions. The energy that you put towards something in a negative way, it actually draws, it like pulls, it takes so much away from you as a human. And, I'll tell you, there's some other things I've read in a book that I'm reading right now, some of our guys in our office, and they talk about astronauts and they talk about how much they prepare astronauts to go into space. They literally go through from the moment they get up in the morning, every little detail. They go over it hundreds of times. Everything from the ride to the spot where they're going to get on the space shuttle, everything from what they're putting on, what they're wearing, all their prep work with all their materials. They go through it hundreds and hundreds of times because what they want to do is they want to have confidence in the system, confidence in the process. Because when you have confidence in the process and you have confidence in the system you're using, you don't freak out as much. You don't lose your cool as much, right? And so these organizations were so confident in their systems. They're so confident in their processes and also in the people they were working side by side with. The recession, the Great Depression, all these things were happening to everyone else. Didn't happen to them. And I really feel that the business that we're in, and I know there's a lot of people that watch this channel from other businesses or whatever, and I hope they adopt this mentality. But I know the business that we're in, that we're really doing that. It's very interesting because month over month in 2023, we've grown in revenue and we've grown in productivity, individually and collectively. And so for me, I had a call yesterday with a lot of the partners and year over year, some people say, they came to me, they said to me recently, some of our support teams, and they said, yeah, April, things changed a little bit and compared to last year. And I was like, why are we looking at last year? I don't look at last year. It doesn't matter. I look at last month. Like, what am I doing now? What am I changing from last week, getting better this week? A year ago, I was a different person. A year ago, we had a different business, right? So I encourage you guys to look at things, believe in the process, believe in the system, and move forward and continue to accomplish. And I'll tell you, there's a saying that I have, and I'm going to kind of say it slowly because it's a little confusing, but it's a good one to write down. The size of the issue that causes a person to lose their attitude. I'm gonna say it again. The size of the issue that causes the person to lose their attitude reflects the size of the character of that person. The size of the issue that causes the person to lose their attitude reflects the size of the character of that person. You know, I'll tell you, when my wife and I moved here to Michigan, we rented a home here around the corner in Farmington Hills, where we live now, and it's a couple miles from our home now. My next door neighbor we ran into, we moved here in November, right? So we moved from California to launch this market in middle of November. We still have California tags on our cars. We get a pretty massive snowstorm. This was back in 2013, when there's like a polar vortex here in Michigan and the Midwest. If you guys remember this time. And we got a lot of snow right around Thanksgiving that year. I remember being, watching football on TV or whatever, and I'm hearing, bzzz. I'm like, what is that noise? And I look out my front door, and my neighbor's like snow blowing my driveway. And I'm like, so I put on my jacket, I go out there, and I'm like, hey, how are you? Like, haven't even met the neighbor, right? We're just, because we got in, start working. I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, my wife mentioned you guys got California tags. I figured you didn't have a snowblower. It's first snow. I know we're getting about 6 inches. You're going to need this. And I was like, dude, thanks. Can I give you some money? Whatever. He's, no, don't worry about it. I got it. Such an incredible attitude. He totally took care of my driveway. And it wasn't like an easy drive. It was like a pretty big driveway. It was like not an easy job. And, it was kind of the beginning of me getting to know him. A few weeks later, I catch him outside, and we start talking. And I noticed in this time that he had a van that was not a normal van, a van that had a lift on it, like where people were pushed in through wheelchairs and things. And, and I never saw it being used, whatever. I just kind of noticed it was open sometimes. So I was like leaving the house or coming in or whatever. And I started to get to know him a little bit. And I asked him, I was like, hey, you got a van that has like, different types of access and stuff. Like, why do you have that? And he said, both of my children are physically disabled. And I was like, really? And I was like, I'm sorry to hear that. And I started talking with him. It was when the kids were born and everything else. And he said, yeah, now they're young adults. They're in their early 20s. And my wife and I take care of them full time. So we need to have this van to get them back and forth to their appointments and to take care of them. And and it was interesting because every single time I saw that guy in the business on the day-to-day, and when I was going to my office and when I was going to work, he always had an incredible attitude. It was like absolutely inspiring to see how this guy showed up in his day. And when I think of the challenges I had, and again, I was a new dad at this point, Brady was super young. We were, my wife and I were, planning on having our second at the time. And the challenges of having a newborn and all that. And I could only imagine how life has challenged him. And it just made me, and I read this quote, I think of him all the time. It was interesting. He was a retired FBI agent, which is kind of interesting because my wife's dad was a retired FBI agent too. So we talked a lot about that, and they actually kind of knew of each other a little bit, which is kind of crazy how the world works. But I think about this quote a lot when I think of that. The size of the issue that causes a person to lose their attitude reflects the size of the character of that person. I just know that guy has incredible character, because although he's challenged with all the things he's got to do to take care of his family, he shows up daily with an incredible attitude. And you'll see this in what we do. You'll see this in sales. You'll see people in the office and in life. And it's an opportunity to learn for sure. But I'd encourage you to think about that is, when things don't go your way, the key is to keep calm. The key is to know that, hey, the world isn't ending today. We're going to get through it, and we're going to accomplish. So that's the first part I want to share with you. The second part is how to be young and successful, how to accomplish. And there's I guess an acronym I'm going to use, and I'm going to spell it out for you. But I'm going to start with the letter C. So if you write it on your little notes that you're taking, C is the first letter. So if you want to be young and successful, the C stands for check yourself. Check yourself for what you need. What resources do you need? What skills do you need? Make a list. What coaches do you need? Right? But you got to check yourself. You got to take an inventory of your skills. Rate them 1 to 10. Hey, if I need to learn sales, what am I? 1 to 10. If I need to learn leadership, 1 to 10. If I need to learn how to keep my attitude, we look at our system, our 8 great work habits. Look at those, rate those 1 to 10. To work a full day. Am I on time? Am I prepared? Like rate them 1 to 10, right? But check yourself is the C. The second letter is O. Obsess over your craft. You have to become an expert in the little things, right? So one thing I talked about and on a call recently for some sales teams, I said, hey, the difference between, and I did this yesterday with our staff in the office, the difference between a person that's great in sales and someone that's not so great is they learn how to do leading questions. They literally have a question track, a series of questions that they ask that leads someone into a close. And they know like the second, third, and fourth question when they ask the first question. For you guys that are experts in the field and what we do, you know what I'm talking about, right? You have these like couple questions here and there. You already know the answers to them, but you're leading the customer where you want them to go. Young sales rep will ask a question. That's a no that'll actually change the impulse of the customer and the customer will walk away. Right? So you got to get feedback and obsess over your craft. And the neat thing is if you want to get really good in sales, there's books out there. I got 2 or 3 of them back here called Sales Closing for Dummies. And I know I'm walking a couple of our top performers or rising stars through that book right now and teaching them how to interact in a sales capacity. But O is obsessed. The next letter is M. Mindfulness. You got to be mindful of who is going to help you grow. Who is in your circle of influence? Are they helping you get ahead? Or are they just causing you challenges, causing you problems? And I'll tell you, there's, and I say this unfortunately often, that there is a group of people in my life in my early 20s, some were close to me, some were just friends of friends or whatever. They had opinions about my career choices. They had opinions that weren't positive opinions about how hard I was working. I know, my mom used to actually even give me a hard time. You're working so hard. Why don't you take a day off? Blah, blah, blah. And it's so interesting to me, like, I'm not looking for a day off. I'm looking for freedom. There's a very big difference. I heard somebody say recently, oh, I haven't taken a day off and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, doing things. And I'm like, that's an employee. Employees get days off. They're always employees. I want freedom. I want to be able to travel the world. I want to make money while I sleep. I started thinking about that in my 20s. Right? There's a very, very big difference. But being mindful of who's in that circle of influence, being mindful of how you speak to yourself, what you're saying. I heard one of my friends, Dan, yesterday talk about how what you say, when you say something, it gives it a lot of purpose. It gives it a lot of weight. Couldn't agree more. Right? And it's not even just saying things to other people. It's what you say to yourself. And again, I say this a ton, but how you speak to yourself, the most important conversation you're going to have is the one you have with yourself. So that's the M. The second letter, the fourth letter is another M. And it stands for mature. I remember in my 20s, this was like a scary word. This was a word that I was like, I like being young and having a good time and going out and partying and going out on a Wednesday night and having a good time on a Wednesday, coming in Thursday, with my eyes like this and just kind of like make my way through some of the leaders meetings and things that we'd have. And I'm like, just kind of sit there and try to act like, I was okay when I was detoxing in the middle of the meeting. Like, I remember Michael sitting down with me, one of my life coaches, business coaches, the guy actually gave me my first opportunity out of college. And he says to me, you know what, Ken, you know what your biggest issue is you're just immature. You're just young. He's like, listen, I'm not telling you that you can't have fun and go out and have a good time. You just have to be smart about it. Like going out on a school night, going on a work night and getting all messed up, probably not the smartest move if you ever want to lead anyone. Because you can't lead yourself and do it professionally, you're not going to lead other people. He's like, in the moment that your days become more important than your nights, you're going to start moving towards what you really want to accomplish. He's like, don't get me wrong. He's like, I go to Vegas and I have a blast and we do our all night parties. Like, don't get me wrong. But I don't do it on a Tuesday night when I got to come in on a Wednesday and really take care of my staff. I don't do it on a night where I got important things going on the next day and I got important trainings that I have to do. I'm just smarter about the process and I had to mature. And you know, when it comes to that, it's like adulting, you know, it's like, I remember again being like, do I really want that? And I realized what I wanted was freedom. I wanted to be able to do whatever I wanted to do whenever I wanted to do it. And I didn't want to wait until my 40s or 50s or even quote unquote retirement in my 60s. Like my parents did when they retired. They started to travel the world. They never got a chance to really travel the world in their 20s and 30s or even in their 40s. And so I wanted to do it at a young age. So you got to mature. The next letter is I. I control my life. It's the idea of taking ownership of where you are. And listen, you could be in a spot that's not very sexy. You could be in a really tough spot. I've been there a few times. And understanding that life is teaching you something. Early in my career, I used to think that it was like a woe's me attitude. It was the world was happening to me. I was more defensive. I was more reactive. And I wasn't able to impact like I wanted to. And I started to realize that things weren't happening to me. They were actually happening for me. And I took ownership and kind of inventory of where I was. And I said, listen, if I really want to get ahead, I need to start looking at things differently. I got to start changing my perspective and changing my attitude towards things. And so I started saying things like, I believe I can do it. I have a picture in my phone. So it's funny it's today, Friday. On Tuesday or Wednesday, my wife and I went out and we went shopping a little bit and my kids were with us. And Mason, my little guy, love him. He's his own man. But he was moving. We were looking at dining room or kitchen tables or whatever at one place. And my little guy he brought chairs over and we asked him, hey, can you take the chair back to that table? We all need any more. He's like, I can't do it. I'm like, Mason, what did you say? So for you guys that know me and know my parenting style, I'm like, Mason, what did you say? He's like, I just can't do it. I can't do it, Daddy. I'm like, Mason, you know the saying. He's like, I don't know the saying. What are you talking about? And I looked at him. I was like, Mason, you know the saying and you need to say it right now. And he's like, I don't know the saying. I don't. He's like, Mason, I'm going to help you. I can do it, but I need a little help. I taught you that at 3 years old. He goes, Daddy, I remember at 3 years old, but how am I supposed to remember it at 7 years old? That was like 4 years ago. And so I said, Mason, you know, when you don't say that saying, there's consequences. When we get home, you're going to write out the saying 10 times on your paper. So he took 15, 20 minutes when he got home and he wrote it out on a piece of paper. And what I'm ultimately doing, and what he doesn't realize what I'm doing, is I'm brainwashing him to think he can do whatever he wants to do. And I'm totally okay with that. I want to make sure that he knows as he gets older, and he's going to be a tough one because he is his own man for sure, that he can do whatever he puts his mind to. And I truly believe everyone on this call, everyone in general in this world, I don't care where you grew up, I don't care what your background was, I don't care what your parents did, you can do it, but you just need a little help. So when you believe in yourself and you believe in what you're doing, you take a different attitude and a different energy towards it. So drive those words, control your life. So that's letter I. And then the last thing is a T. And it stands for tests. And there's going to be a lot of them. There's going to be a lot of tests along your career. Most of them you bring on yourself, I've realized. I've done it to myself. Other times, other people will bring them to you. You know, some of you guys that know recently, people ask me, hey, 20 years in my career, like what's been the biggest challenge? What's been the biggest issue or whatever? And it wasn't anything but life. Life has tested me over and over and over. And I'll tell you, the question is going to be is whatever test that you have, and they'll come often. They'll come sometimes frequently and fast and hard or whatever. And what's going to happen is you're going to make a decision when you're tested. And you're going to make a decision to give up on yourself, give up on your goals, make a change, or you're going to make a decision to grow and change and improve and continue to move towards what you really want. And I can tell you this, when you're tested, it ultimately tests your commitment. And the word we just spelled was commit. And in my opinion, if you want to be successful at a young age, you're going to have to commit to what you really want, your goals, your dreams. And this has nothing to do with what your parents want for you or what your friends want for you. It's what you really want. And again, what I've always wanted and what I've created in my life is freedom. And I started off early in my career, believing in myself. I started to check myself. I started to get obsessed over things. I started being very mindful of how I looked at things. I started to mature. I wish I matured a lot faster than I did mature in my early years, but I little by little in that one. And then over time, I realized that, hey, I had to take more responsibility for myself and where I stand and what I'm doing. And then learning that these tests that we go through are meant to help you and meant to make you stronger. But I can tell you this, I truly, truly believe as you commit to yourself and you're going to commit to growing, you commit to your next logical step, you're going to make moves to accomplishing what you really, really want. So that's what I have for you guys today. History proves that no matter what's happening in the world, what's happening around us, there's great companies that are built. There's great individuals that are built. There's a lot of wealth that is built during tough times. But all you got to do is commit and learn how to make those next steps. So happy Friday. Thanks for jumping on today. Thanks for subscribing on our Clear channel. You guys have an amazing, amazing weekend. And looking forward to seeing you guys next week as well. Thanks so much for jumping on.